This is a creepy panda production. Diabolical Conjurations. The air in Salem always had a certain chill to it, but this evening the frost seemed to bite just a little harder. My old pickup truck rattled along the forest road, the headlights illuminating the pines that stood like silent sentinels. It had been years since I dared to venture near the old Hawthorne property at the edge of town. The Hawthorne house was notorious in local lore, a withering edifice that mourned its own existence. As a history teacher at Salem High, I felt an odd responsibility to preserve its memory. Despite the shivers the mere mention of it sent down my spine. Decades ago, the Hawthornes were accused of witchcraft, and with that accusation, an inferno of hysteria engulfed the town. Rather than face a judge, the family allegedly performed a final, desperate incantation before they vanished without a trace. The town slowly reclaimed normalcy, yet the whispers persisted. Whispers of something sinister binding itself to the very soil of the Hawthorne grounds. Tonight was a product of curiosity and stupidity. Armed with just a flashlight and the keys to the creaking front door, which I procured from the local historical society, I ignored the echoing advice from Colleen, the town librarian. "Don't mess with what you don't understand," she warned. The Hawthorne house groaned as I entered, protesting my intrusion. The air was thick with the musty stench of decay, and each step forward felt as if I were wading through history's forgotten moments. Shadows danced along the walls, thrown by the quivering beam of my flashlight. The heart of the house was the library, its books a moth-eaten tapestry of arcane knowledge and history. That's where I found the book, its cover marred by time but its pages surprisingly intact. It was the Hawthorne's personal grimoire, filled with chilling sketches and incantations in a language that seemed to tremble on the edge of understanding. The logical side of my brain urged me to leave the grimoire undisturbed. Yet, an inexplicable compulsion lured my eyes to the text. Before I could muster the sense to resist, a phrase slipped from my lips, a chorus of ancient syllables that seemed to resonate with the very walls of the Hawthorne house. A sudden gust of wind slammed the library door shut, and I found myself ensnared in an abyssal silence. The darkness swelled around me, and the flashlight flickered out, succumbing to an oppressive force that clawed at the edge of my perception. I fumbled in the blackness, a primal fear quickening my breath. In the void, murmurs began to manifest, coiling around me like serpents made of smoke. I could feel an icy grip tightening around my chest as the shadows took form, and the floorboards whispered with the phantom footsteps of the long-gone Hawthornes. Without warning, the room ignited with ghostly luminescence, revealing the library twisted into a grotesque version of itself. Books fluttered open, their pages flapping like the wings of countless disturbed birds. Words from the grimoire burned into the air with an unholy glow, enveloping the room in a sickly light. Powerless against the maelstrom of dark energy, I was lifted off my feet, suspended by invisible hands. The words continued to spill from somewhere deep within me, a torrent I could no longer control. I was a vessel for something ancient and malevolent, a force that had patiently waited to be summoned once more into the world. The Hawthorne's legacy was no mere tale, but a truth that clawed its way through the veil. I saw them then, not through my eyes, but through an understanding beyond sight. They encircled me, ethereal and enraged, their whispers crescendoing into screams. With every fiber of my being, I willed myself to break the incantation, but the words drove themselves deeper, like thorns. It was then, amidst the chaos, that I heard another voice, clear and defiant against the storm. Colleen. The librarian stood in the doorway, clutching her own worn tome, one filled with counterspells and protective rites. She began to chant, her voice a lance of light cutting through the thick darkness. Her incantations met the pandemonium with stoic resolve, and with each passing moment, the Hawthorne's apparitions waned. The house buckled under the clashing energies, its ancient timber groaning in protest. Finally, with a sound like the snapping of immense chains, the shadows burst apart, scattering into the ether. I fell to the floor, gasping for the reborn silence. Colleen rushed to my side, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and triumph. As we made our shaky escape from the Hawthorne house, the dawn was just beginning to finger the horizon. Colleen and I shared a look that communicated more than words ever could. a pact sealed by the ordeal we had somehow survived. We rode back to town in my old pickup truck, the silence between us not uncomfortable, but filled with the gravity of the unspoken. The sun's rays began to warm the cold Salem morning, but the chill from the Hawthorne House's diabolical conjurations would linger with me forever. Hexed Awakening. Sleep never had been a sanctuary for me. Instead, it was the time when anxieties and nightmares would have their nocturnal carnival. That night, as moonlight peeked through the slats of the blinds in my bedroom in the century-old house on Elm Street, Sandpoint, Idaho, unsettling dreams once again took hold. A deep, vibrating hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere pervaded the room, and a sense of dread slowly washed over me. The following morning was unusually overcast. The town laid silent, enveloped in a dense, impenetrable fog. I ventured out, shrugging off the eerie quality of my dreams, attributing them to the stress of recently relocating to this small, close-knit community. I needed a coffee, a touch of the familiar, as I stepped out into the mist. The silence felt heavier with each step toward the local cafe down at Cedar Street. Upon entry, the barista's eyes locked with mine, showing a mix of recognition and something akin to fear. Whispered, "Good mornings" exchanged, but the chill from outside seemed to linger around her. I shrugged it off, waiting for my order when a faint scratching noise buzzed in the background. It rose and fell erratically, reminiscent of my nightmare's hum. My hand grasped the warm cup, leaving hurriedly, the scratching intensifying as the door closed behind me. The town seemed foreign to my eyes, everything unclear, as if a veil of distortion wrapped around the very air. With each step, that unnerving sense of dislocation grew, like walking through a dream or a memory not my own. A glance at my phone revealed a string of unread notifications, messages from friends I didn't recognize, meeting places that had no significance to me, words and names that felt alien on my tongue. Shaken, I made my way to the town library, a beacon of normalcy in the ever-twisting reality. The Sandpoint Library, normally a refuge of calm, was deserted. I navigated through rows of books, seeking familiarity among the titles, but found them shifting, altering before my eyes. Texts I'd never heard of, about local history that seemed rewritten, wrong somehow. My mist-coated palms left damp trails along the oak shelves. Books seemed to vibrate with that same eerie hum, casting long shadows as if hiding darker, unseen texts within. It was on my way out that I found it. An ancient tome that radiated a sinister aura, nestled in a forgotten corner of the library. Unnaturally compelled to examine it, the book's title, Hexed Awakening, was etched in faded gold lettering. When my fingers brushed the spine, the buzzing grew to a crescendo. As I paged through it, I found my name inscribed within a chant, one I somehow knew and felt I had eternally dreaded. Later that day, I couldn't shake the sense of alteration that had come over Sandpoint, over me. People I met didn't recall events we'd shared. Places I'd frequented had their histories rewritten. Even landmarks like the Cedar Street Bridge seemed decades older, corroded by time not witnessed. I avoided my reflection, feeling a stranger to myself. Someone or something else gazing back with an expression that threatened recognition. This is how I found myself standing at the edge of Lake Pendore as the sun began to set, painting the water crimson and violet. I could feel the ancient vibrations emanating from the ground, through my feet, up into my very soul. The nightmare was no longer confined to the dark recesses of sleep. It was awake, alive, and I was the vessel it had chosen. Panicked voices shouted my name from somewhere distant, but they were being drowned out by that relentless, deep hum. I fought the overwhelming urge to wade into the darkening waters, the manuscript's words still fresh in my mind. My voice rose weakly in an attempt to recite them, to gain control, or perhaps to surrender. It was then that the humming ceased abruptly, and an eclipsing silence fell upon the lake. I woke up to a circle of worried faces, friends and strangers alike. They told me I had been missing for days, though I have no recollection of where I had been or what nightmare had held me captive. They couldn't explain it, and neither could I. But one thing I knew for sure: Sandpoint wasn't the same anymore, nor was I. As I left the confines of the hospital, the memory of the hum lingered, a haunting lullaby for a hexed awakening. Spells in Shadow. No one ever talks about the old mill on the outskirts of Dresher, Pennsylvania. Nestled deep in the woods, where the trees seem to swallow the sky, it's like the place consumes memories, just as it consumes the lingering light. Maybe that's why I decided to explore it, to prove to myself there was nothing to fear. Slinging my camera across my shoulder, I ventured towards the decrepit structure. The woods were silent around me, save for the crunch of dead leaves underfoot. I should have known then, the way nature held its breath, that this place was more than it seemed. But the thrill of uncovering forgotten history propelled me further. The door of the mill gave way with a haunting creak, revealing a world untouched by time. The musty air was thick with the scent of rotten wood and old earth. My flashlight pierced the darkness, illuminating a scene that might well have existed 100 years ago. As I moved inward, my camera clicking away, an unease began to build in my gut. I found a book, its pages yellow and brittle amidst the dust and decay. Spells in Shadow, read the cracked leather cover. Fingers trembling, I opened it, and whispered words seemed to hum from the ancient text. The air shifted, became colder, and I felt eyes on me. I should have put the book down. I should have left, but I couldn't. I read on, and with each word I spoke, shadows deepened, stretched, and took shape. Whispers grew into murmurs, murmurs into voices, and then I saw them, forms woven from darkness, surrounding me with eyes that knew no soul, no mercy. Panic seized me, and I tried to run, but the shadows, they held me there. I don't know how I escaped, or if I truly did at all. Sometimes I wake up smelling the must of that old mill, hearing the whispers in the walls of my own home. People avoid me now. They claim there's a darkness in my eyes. I can't shake the feeling, no, the knowledge that the shadows are waiting, biding their time. I've researched since then, scouring every source, trying to find anything about spells in Shadow. Nothing exists. It's as though the book was a phantom, like the mill itself. But deep down, I know it was real. Because at night, when the world is asleep, the shadows dance, and the voices whisper truths I don't want to understand. The Cursed Grimoire. Whispers about the old Versailles library spoke of dusty tomes and cursed knowledge hidden within its forgotten stacks. As an eager, albeit naive historian, my quest for arcane manuscripts led me to its decrepit doors one summer eve. Stepping inside, I felt the air chilled by more than just the absence of sunlight. The library was a labyrinth. Shelves stretched into shadows, and among them, an ancient grimoire called. You'd think it'd be the leather cover or the strange script that pulled me to it, but no, it was the silence that surrounded the book that swallowed my attention. I reached for it, fingers trembling, not out of fear, but anticipation. Opening the grimoire unleashed something. Words were not merely ink but seeds, germinating darkness in the library's heart. The air grew heavy, and I struggled to breathe, as if the very oxygen had turned to treacle. Every shadow seemed to stretch, twist, and whisper promises of untold secrets and forgotten horrors. It was exhilarating. That night, when I returned home with the cursed tome under my arm, unease clawed at my mind. Strange occurrences followed. Objects moved, dreams turned to vivid nightmares, and the shadows in my apartment danced with a life of their own, as if celebrating their newfound vessel in me. In the following days, I became obsessed with the grimoire, poring over its strange symbols and incantations. Friends claimed I looked gaunt, hollow-eyed. I just laughed it off, but deep down I knew that something had taken root within me. Something ancient and malevolent, drawn forth by my reckless curiosity. It wasn't until I saw my reflection twist with inhuman malice that terror truly took hold. My apartment, once a haven, had become a den of whispers and ghouls that lurked in the corners of my vision. Sleep turned to an impossibility. I was fueled only by the undying urge to unearth the mysteries I had unfurled from that accursed book. Desperate for respite, I sought help from an old professor, an expert in occult studies. His eyes widened upon seeing the grimoire, and with a tremor in his voice he spoke of an ancient curse, one that shackled spirits to mortal realms and fed on the living. I had become a conduit, he said, a living nexus between worlds. Following his guidance to break the curse would be no simple feat. I had to return the grimoire to where it belonged, entomb it once again in the silence of the old library in Versailles. And so, in the dead of night, I set out, grappling with the forces that did not wish to be caged again. screaming into my mind. My return to the library was a pilgrimage through a nightmare. Spectral figures flitted in my peripherals, urging me deeper into the stacks. The grimoire seemed to pulsate with a vile life of its own as I placed it back into the shadows from which it came. A bone-chilling silence fell, and I prayed the curse was broken. I wish I could tell you the nightmare ended there, but when I left Versailles, part of the darkness clung to me, a shadow entwined with my own. Life is now a balance, an effort to keep the tendrils of that otherworldly abyss at bay. The grimoire's whispers still reach out, a siren's call, tempting me to once again embrace the cursed knowledge I so foolishly sought. Whispering witches, darkness fell like a shroud over the small town of Smithfield. I'd always found the place unsettling, with its old, weathered buildings and the whispers of townsfolk who spoke of strange happenings after sundown. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, I was on the edge of discovering what lay behind those whispers. My interest in the supernatural was more than just a hobby. It was an obsession that had drawn me towards Smithfield. The townspeople talked in hushed tones about the whispering witches, supposedly a coven buried in the heart of the old forest. I was skeptical, but curious enough to venture into the shadowy thicket as the stars began to emerge. Navigating the dense forest was like moving through another world. Occasionally, an eerie chill would slither down my spine, and I'd hear what sounded like faint whispers brushing against the leaves. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind. Every few steps, the whispers seemed to grow louder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Pushing deeper into the forest, I stumbled upon an old well, covered in a myriad of vines and moss. It was right there, in the palpable silence around the well, that the air grew cold and the whispers became voices. The voices were indistinct at first, like a conversation happening at the edge of hearing. But slowly they became clearer, chanting in a language I couldn't understand. There was a rhythmic quality to it, entrancing and terrifying in equal measure. I couldn't move. The darkness around me seemed to thicken, and the chanting filled my ears, pushing against my will to flee. As my eyes adjusted to the low light, figures started to materialize around the well, ethereal and glowing faintly with an unnatural hue. Women, or what were once women, their eyes hollow, their voices melding into a cacophony of whispers that seemed to say my name. Panic set in, and I turned to run, but the forest had changed, or I had changed. The path I'd taken no longer existed. In its place were gnarled trees and an impenetrable fog. The witch's whispers grew to a roar, echoing in my head. The night seemed endless, and I wandered aimlessly, every direction leading back to the well. The whispering witches wouldn't let me leave. Desperation clawed at my sanity. I tried to yell for help, scream at the phantoms to let me go, but my voice was absorbed by the forest. As dawn approached, the whispering ceased abruptly, and the ghostly figures around the well vanished. The night's terror felt like a dream, until I looked down and saw my hands were streaked with dirt and scratches from the thorns. Exhausted and afraid, I made my way back to Smithfield. Upon returning, the townsfolk avoided my gaze, their faces etched with a mix of fear and pity. It was clear they knew of the ordeal that took me, yet none would speak of it. They acted as if the whispering witches were nothing more than a tale to keep children in line. But I knew the truth. The witches were real, and their curse was no mere story. As I left Smithfield behind, the weight of the night's terror settled in my bones. Would the whispering ever truly leave me, or would it lay dormant until the darkness called again?